afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar Operation Summer Series. Today we'll be covering Train Like You Operate. What the purpose of this webinar is, through this series we have been trying to get better education out there on certain subjects. If you have missed some of our previous webinars, we did law enforcement, we did fire rescue, critical infrastructure, and those can all be found on our YouTube. This is going to be recorded and will also be on our YouTube as well. We'd love for you to check those out. But the common theme this summer was giving out quality information to those working in public safety, critical infrastructure, those who are professional drone pilots in some form or fashion. Today, we've got a really good crew with us to go over training. So I will let them introduce themselves. We'll start with Joe Cox from over at Alachua County.
Yeah, I'm Joe Cox, Alachua County Fire Rescue. I've worked with the department for 34 years now. The last 13 years has been at district chief level. Started out in the department when we got the drone program is probably its biggest skeptic. Since that time, I've now become its biggest advocate and also one of the chief pilots for the program.
Thanks, Joe. Tim?
I'm Tim Davis. I've been with the department for 27 years, first as a paramedic firefighter and the last 12 years in IT. Myself and Scott Fielding were the co-founders of our UAS team from back in 2015.
Thanks, Tim. Ryan, appreciate you joining us. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, good afternoon. Ryan English. I'm the CEO, co-founder, FlyMotion. Started the company with my business partner, David Stratchko, about 6.5 years ago. Come out of public safety and the military myself, having spent over 20 years between fire rescue, law enforcement, and the U.S. Coast Guard. So thanks for the opportunity to share what we've been doing with the audience.
Of course, and last but certainly not least, Rich Gatanis.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I'm Rich Gatanis. I'm the U.S. Operations Manager here at FlyMotion. I've been with the company for about 3 years now, actually 3 years this month, actually. I do most of the training and integration for public safety agencies. I'm also in the fire service myself with Southern Manatee Fire Rescue. I've been there for 17 years now. We also enjoy a robust UAS program at my department doing hazmat response with unmanned systems.
Before we start in here, and I have the Alachua guys kind of describe what their program looks like, I do want to say there is a questions portion of the dashboard you should have there on your screen. This will be open the entire webinar, and we'll have about 10-15 minutes at the end to get these experts to answer these questions for you. So feel free to pop in any questions you have, and hopefully we can get to all of them by the end of this. So without further ado, Tim and Joe, if you'd like to take over and give us a little insight into your organization.
Hey, thank you. Like I said, our team development started in late 2015, and it really solidified, I guess, up around the time Part 107 came out. We now have 7 Part 107 remote pilots, and traditionally we've always tried to do a mix of administration and field personnel, which brings various backgrounds. We have a mix of IT, operations, chief level staff, and other leadership from the department that's on our team. Currently, we're providing support to all our local public safety agencies, including the Alachua County Sheriff's Department, Gainesville Police Department, University of Florida, and Forestry. As a team, I guess we specialize mostly in large events. However, we train in various other aspects, including search and rescue, damage assessment, like a lot of the other programs. We currently operate under both a jurisdictional and a blanket COA, and we do have Part 107 waivers for airspace and daylight operations. Currently, our team, we're on basically our deployment vehicle started as our IT van, and we're on version about 3.0 of that vehicle. The more we learn, the more we add or take away. We try to have that vehicle ready for 72-hour deployment within a short notice. Our current equipment includes the 200, 210, recently, in fact, within the last 2 days, a 300 and the Mavic 2E dual. We have the various payloads for those devices. Like a lot of teams, we've come full circle on a lot of the software we use. Currently, we're using DroneSense and Pix4D. Those things, as on a recent call that we're on, we're finding that we're not the only team that's coming full circle on the various software platforms. We're blessed to have a lot of good teams around us that we interact with and train with on a regular basis. And that exchange of information has really helped our team.
Tim, would you mind sharing how many pilots your agency's running right now?
Right now we have 7 Part 107 pilots. So in regards to our training program, again, the more we do, the more we learn. We initially started with a quarterly 8-hour training session and quickly realized that that was not enough time to maintain the skill levels that were needed for a program like ours. That took some interaction with our administration to show them the value of monthly training. It is required for our team to attend at least one 8-hour monthly training session. Generally, we start with review. We review systems, we review pilot UIs, we review policy, and then we proceed on to some sort of scenario-based training. We generally gear our program training so that half of 4 hours are daylight, 4 hours are night, so we have experienced both daylight and nighttime operations. I will say, when we attended UTAC last year, that we really didn't know what to expect. We had never heard of the Guardian Center in Perry, Georgia. To say we were blown away is an understatement. We arrived there, and traditionally, as everybody knows, if you're in public safety, you know that you say that when you're in a training scenario or evolution, it's, well, I would do this or I would do that given this certain situation. And the Guardian Center and the UTAC scenarios were the first opportunity that we had to actually experience a true hazmat situation or experience an active shooter situation where it seemed as real as it could possibly be given the situation.
Awesome. Appreciate you guys mentioning that. We're going to have Ryan cover quite a bit about UTAC towards the end of the webinar, so make sure you stay tuned for that. And any questions you guys have about that, I'm sure these guys would love to answer, so don't forget to send in your questions. Next, we're going to go ahead and have Rich go through a few different sections here, why we need to train, how we train, and why we do what we do here at FlyMotion. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Rich.
Thanks, Justin. UAS has changed quite a bit in how we use it in public safety from the early days when they were simply putting aircraft in the air to get just a situational awareness tool to complex systems that are actually partaking and becoming first responders themselves. And so, we asked the question, why are we using UAS in public safety? And the short answer, I would say, that makes most sense is because drones are a force multiplier. What I mean by that is it gives your personnel the ability to accomplish greater feats than they would have been able to without having that system. And that, I think we've seen that proven time and time again when we deploy our stuff, and I'm sure Joe and Tim would agree with that. It increases the safety for our personnel, and how it does that is, obviously, like I mentioned before, the situational awareness side of it is a huge part. Especially, it gives those that are in the command and control part of the operation the ability to have a bird's eye view of all the working is going on, especially in large structures or large scenes where you have, like Alatra, I'm sure, does wildland fires and large area search and rescue, stuff like that. So having that ability to have that eye in the sky perspective is huge. But it also does some things like that we used to have to rely on radio communication or some other means of communication other than visual communication. So by adding that video camera feed back to the decision makers has really changed the way many of our responses turn out and how long it takes them to happen. So, and then, like I say here, saving time means saving money. What I mean by that is when we're able to mitigate these scenes in a more rapid pace because we're able to gather information more rapidly, it saves time because, for instance, critical infrastructure is a big one. I know for a hazmat scene on an interstate or even a hazmat scene at a industrial area that's shutting down roadways, that has a huge financial impact. Same with a brush fire. But when we can use these systems to gather more information, gather it more rapidly, to be able to make smarter decisions, ends up cutting those response times and those mitigation times down significantly. And I know right now we hear a lot about drones and how they're saving lives, and it's great. We get these headlines: drones have saved 400-500 people, whatever it is, in the last so many years. But what I think goes unheard is the dull, dirty, and dangerous part that the drones are doing that don't make headlines, but they're saving tons of time and saving personnel and saving the safety or keeping our personnel safe. And then obviously the visual perspective, the scope and the scale of an incident is hard to determine when you're on the ground. It's hard to see the forest from the trees. Analogy is used a lot, especially on a large scale incident, but having that aerial perspective is huge. So why do we need to train? So safety and responsibility is a huge part of what we do. The safety side of it, the responsibility side of it, our first priority should always be our safety of our the public officers, the officials, and then the people on the ground. So when we're training and we're talking to folks, that has to be, point number one, the keeping our folks and the citizens of the community safe is got to be job number one. So that's why when we train to a certain proficiency level to make sure the pilots are not only proficient on how to operate the aircraft, but they also understand what the regulations, local, state, and federal regulations are of these unmanned systems. One of the challenges is those change constantly. They're constantly changing. You see it nationally, and you see it on the state level, what we can and can't do, or what one can do and what one can't do with these using these systems. And the other side of that, the important part of training is the public perception. I think a lot of times we don't think about this one quite as much. And I think this one needs to be a pretty important part of our training program. When our agencies look the same across the board, all of our pilots and our visual observers and our command staff, and we're all using the same terminology, we're all flying the same type of patterns. It looks professional and it drives perception, and perception, is a huge part of what we do. And people right now, as you know, public safety is not the favorite. It's a love-hate relationship for specifically law enforcement, but even fire out there right now. So now that public safety agencies are using drones has a negative connotation to it. So we need to make sure that our training and how we operate these systems in the public eye has a lasting impression, as a solid proficiency on what we're doing and certification process too. So here at FlyMotion, we sat down and we wanted to make sure that when we train agencies and we work with different folks, that we cover all those bases. And I know a lot of people do it. They train a little differently, but for us, it was important to make sure we started out with a good foundation with our pilots. And most of the agencies that we work with, we recommend two things, and which I think most agencies are doing, but we want them to be Part 107 pilots. And then we also want them to operate under a COA if they can for their agency. Not always that easy to do, but we do want them to do that. And that's something that we actually work with them to help them build the regulation side out, the regulatory side. So we in our at the ground floor, we start off with those as regulations. We kind of get them familiar with their aircraft right out the gate, get them better understanding what it is, the different hardware, the maintenance that goes with that, different software features. And then, we want them to know the aircraft, be comfortable with it before they take their first flight. And then obviously with our basic flight side of it, we practice safety. Safety is a huge part of it, especially on scene. I always think about the 3 a.m. call, what we're doing today, are they going to be able to do this at 3 a.m. and make sure that they train to that 3 a.m. call, because that's when the rubber meets the road, and is how your training pays off in those kind of circumstances. So we want to make sure that everything looks the same across the board. And best practices, I know Tim could probably agree with me. I've learned a few best practices by making a lot of mistakes. And we're happy to be able to explain what we think is the best way to do things, because we've gone down those dead end roads and made mistakes to learn from them. So, and then obviously the when can I fly, where can I fly kind of aspect of it. So we have, every agency is a little different where they're at, their airspace that they're in, and then the regulatory side of when they can fly and where they're allowed to fly. We have to kind of work with them on that to build that out. We also have many different advanced levels geared towards specific disciplines in UAS. So obviously you have the basic flights, UAS, and then we also have the more advanced stuff. And I think we'll dive in a little more of that with UTech side. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But some of those right here with search and rescue tactics, interior flight operations, night ops, vehicle interdictions, which is a huge part of what I think part of public law enforcement. We like to try to work with those guys. And then obviously NIST is a big part of our training program as well.
Before we go over to NIST, Tim and Joe, just quick question that came to mind for me. What is, when we're talking about training standards, what does onboarding a new pilot look like for you guys?
Onboarding for us, now our team's been established for a while. We haven't had a lot of new members, but our basic requirement is that they start out obtaining their 107 on their own. We decided early on we did not want to teach Part 107. There's a lot of good training material out there that we had them or gave them access to. And for us, it was kind of a litmus test to see what their commitment was to joining the team. If you can get past 107, if you're not familiar with aviation, then that's a good first step. Once they're done with the Part 107, we bring them in and we have an orientation class where we expose them to the various systems that we're currently using. Like a lot of other programs, it's a crawl, walk, run type scenario where we're showing them systems and gradually introducing them to the aircraft and the basic fly the box, fly these basic maneuvers, and what are the regulations when you fly. For us, transparency to the public is a huge thing. And so we want them, when they're in the public eye, to operate according to our SOGs and guidelines. We don't want to have that bad interaction with the public, and all that starts with, like Rich said, a good foundation.
And also, I'd like to chime in that given we're a fire department based, NIST is starting to come into play in a big way because of NFPA 2400. Pretty much it outlines the different skills level for each position, whether you're going to be the VO or the pilot, and a certain skill set, which is a good starting point for any of our team members to be able to accomplish those goals. And then once they're done with that, they tend to feel more comfortable, and then we, as the administrators of the program, tend to feel more comfortable with their capabilities to be able to fly. So can't stress enough that going through those checklists, if you're fire department based, or establishing some type of checklist for your new pilots is a must. And you've got to train these guys exactly like you're going to play. So if you get a call, they have to be able to think on the fly. Your training needs to interject some different scenarios, as well as some injects into those scenarios to change it up so it's not just a basic routine, we're going to fly this way every time. We've also established mission cards, which help our team members with a basis for what they're going to start with. And then the injects come in, as well as requests from incident command.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joe, because that kind of is a great segue into this next slide where we wanted to talk a little more about NIST. One of the challenges that's come up in public safety over the last few years is, UAS inside of public safety came on the scene so fast that the regulatory side of it had a hard time deciding what to do with it. And so many agencies were kind of, for lack of a better word, going cowboy and just doing their own thing and running their own program. And to be perfectly honest with you, Southern Manatee, my department was the same way. There wasn't a lot of guidance out there. So we had to kind of make it up as we went. We reached out to other agencies. I know Tim and Joe at Alachua Academy, we've bounced ideas back and forth in the past. Many agencies we've done this with to try to come up with what makes the most sense on how to move forward with the program, and because training is such a big part of that. The folks over at NIST, which for those of you guys don't know, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And these guys basically come up with different ways of standardizing and testing different pieces of technology. Mainly, you probably heard of them in the robot world. So most of your folks that are using robots in EOD or underwater systems, NIST has developed a standardized testing to develop the proficiency and the efficiency of these systems, and they have these scalable tests that they develop. Well, since UAS became a thing, NIST, those guys over at NIST decided to start building out a way for us to test not only the pilots, but the systems the pilots are running at the same time. This was a big step because what happened is NIST is a nationally recognized, organization that tests equipment. And when as Joe mentioned, when NFPA 2400 came out, they recommended NIST as a part of your training program. So as an administrator, that was a huge thing part that happened. And now we have a recommendation from the NFPA. And for those of you that don't know, the NFPA is the National Fire Protection Agency. and they're the governing body over the fire service in the U.S. Now, you ask, well, what does that got to do with law enforcement? So even though the NFPA is on the fire side, the governing bodies of all these agencies, they lean on each other. So NFPA is starting to become a part of, the law enforcement side of it, as well as using their guidance to start building out their own version of that too. So that being said, NIST is an important part that we feel an important part of any training program. And because what it does, it's a simplified test, and you can see it on these slides here. Buckets and 2x4s is what we like to say. It's very, very low cost effective way to certify your pilot. And there's a series of different ways you can test them. But again, what it does, it builds proficiency and efficiency on using the different systems you have, because it's every system that you use has a different capability. Some systems are designed to carry heavy payloads, fly for long duration flights. Some are small systems for interior operations and different thermal capabilities, whatnot. Well, there's a test for that, and there's a way the pilots can get certified on it, have that certificate. And what that does at the end of the day, now, as long as my training is in line, my policies in line, my pilot flight certifications in line, and then also have a NIST standardized testing for my pilot, when that accident happens, because it's going to happen, I have a ton of paperwork showing that this pilot was not negligent. He is proficient at what he does. This was an accident. And that's what, at the end of the day, all the administrators want to see, is to be a way that they can make sure that their pilots are certified and they're not just out there cowboying it up. So why do we train like this? In the fire service, we have a saying that says, train like we fight. Everything we do, when we're training, we try to make it as real as possible. If it's raining, it's a common thing. Like, we fight fires in the rain, so we have to train in the rain. Same with UAS. It's the same type of mindset. We need to position ourselves and put ourselves in these scenarios that are as real as we possibly can get it. It's a little bit of a segue into UTAC, which I'll let Ryan jump into that in a minute. But just understand that these UAS are tools just like any other tool we have on our apparatus. The challenge is trying to learn from an administrative side and a command perspective, when to deploy these systems. That's a big hurdle that has to come up in an agency they have to overcome, because what I see happening is you have agencies that are building programs and starting to deploy these systems. But unfortunately, what happens is it becomes an afterthought, and the system gets deployed at the end of this call, and it's not being used as an active participant in the scene. So that's a huge hurdle, and that's, again, where training comes in. Understanding the aircraft's limitations, I can tell you from experience. I've had command level folks ask me to do something that I can't do. Either the drone can't do it, or I can't do it safely with the aircraft that I have. So those are important pieces to train on, not just for your pilots, but the command staff that'll be asking them to do things. So those are some hurdles that we had to overcome, and I'm sure some of you out there will have to as well.
Hey, Joe and Tim, I know Rich touched on a little bit, but have you guys had a standard come across for how you guys decide whether or not a UAS is going to be deployed?
The standard, we have a certain list of call types where the team is notified and they can choose to respond, or one of the officers responding to that scene can request them in advance. At that point, they're deployed, they show up on scene, and then the pilot in command is the one who will make the final determination on whether to launch. It's a no or no-go situation. I think what's helped us the most is we've trained with all the other public safety agencies in our area. We've trained with the bomb squad, so they know our capabilities. We've trained with dive team, light technical rescue teams. We've been on hazmat calls, these large-scale events for the different law enforcement agencies, as well as barricaded subjects and those type of things. So not only our training lean towards those types of scenarios, but it allows for them to know exactly what our capabilities are, and that ultimately, even if we're there, that the pilot will have the final say-so on what we can and cannot do.
Do you guys
Right.
have a risk-reward matrix for that? Is that like a go, no-go kind of matrix?
For the most part, it is. A lot of that is based on what exactly command is asking from us. A lot of times they'll ask for something that may be unrealistic, and then we'll interject with the fact that, well, we can't give you exactly that, but this is what we can give you. Take a look at this and see what else you need. So we try not to say we're not going to fly at all, but we try to give them what we can and then let them build on that.
Right. And to give you an example of that, we were recently on a SWAT call, and during the briefing, they showed us where we were going to set up and launch from. And looking at the map, we knew right away that it wasn't going to work. It was over a mile away from the scene where they were going to be doing operations. And so we used that point to say, well, UAS is not capable to launch and be safe and fly from that distance. However, we always give them an alternative. This area here we're familiar with. This puts us within range of our capabilities of the aircraft and our pilot, and we think this will work better. So in approaching it that way has worked out well for us. The various specialty teams we work with lean heavily on our recommendations based on our experience, and it works. To echo something that Rich was saying, a struggle for our team and our area still is being called late into a situation, and it's something that we work on every week, and it's just it can be frustrating, but I would challenge everyone to just carry on, keep educating, and it comes with time. It can be frustrating, but it will come with time.
And we, on that point too, we also, one of the courses that we offer is, that command level piece. And I hate to admit it, but in the fire service, especially, guys who are wearing bugles don't necessarily always take the opinion of the guy who's not wearing any. And sometimes they need to be taught or instructed by those who do have the bugles. And so, one of the courses that we're be offering here at FlyMotion is a command perspective of how and when to utilize UAS in a response. That's again a good piece that I think we should definitely talk about, because I think now as more and more agencies are using these systems, that's a much needed piece of the puzzle that isn't currently out there. In the so anyways, back to the scenario-based learning piece. I just want to hit this real quick. So one of the important pieces that we want to make sure when we're out and working with agencies is how to take that NIST piece and incorporate that into their everyday training. And NIST is built out very well for this. So, taking these same NIST targets and incorporating into their everyday training. So for instance, whether we're teaching a fire department and they're doing hazmat response, or it's a law enforcement agency and we're teaching vehicle interdiction, we incorporate the NIST into their daily training. So now they're not just out in the field flying, right? Because anybody can go out in a football field and fly a drone and become a professional pilot, at least in their own minds. The challenge is, how do we take that scenario-based learning, incorporate it with the NIST training? Now I can have a certified pilot doing, certified training with these targets. So that's one of the things that we do when we work with these agencies, is to build that program out so they know what that looks like. So when we leave there, their wheels are turning and they're moving forward with their program.
Appreciate it, Rich. I know Rich touched on just a little bit one of the courses that FlyMotion offers for training. Once we talk about UTAC and the offerings there, we'll go through a couple more classes that FlyMotion can offer, and Ryan can touch on some of those as well. But we'll go ahead and move into the UTAC portion here. It's the Unmanned Tactical Application Conference. And Ryan, if you will, we'll go ahead and take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So when we originally had come up with the concept for UTAC, and we held our first one in 2019, unfortunately due to COVID and the likes thereof, the one for 2020 has been postponed, but we're looking forward to picking that back up. Yeah, so definitely anxious about that. But one of the things, we've trained a lot of agencies all over the country and out of the country as well. And one of the common themes that we were finding was a lot of users were training in an environment that was not realistic to what they would encounter in day-to-day operations. And thus UTAC was born. We went to the drawing board and really looked at it. Our own team has, decades of our own experience operationally, coming from, public safety, government, and the military. And so, we definitely had a good foundation to start with, but, incorporating obviously UTAC and other UAS and other technologies into UTAC was of paramount importance to us. And so really, what UTAC is, and the whole purpose behind it was to bring, those from public safety, government, defense, and industry that are using UAS in real world operations and allow them to have an environment where they can be put through scenarios, real world based scenarios that, can really test their skill set. The thing, as I mentioned, a lot of times we were seeing is, agencies were training, and they were basically, which is great. I'm a big believer in training, but they were training in an environment that they just, as I mentioned, they just would not, that's not how they would do day-to-day operations. Going around and flying in a field or, out in an open area or things like that, gets down basic fundamentals of operations and using the technology. But, if your program, if the only place that you've trained is, flying around maybe your police district or firehouse or training grounds and things of that nature, and then your UAS program goes operational, then you are expected by administration to, you may have a multi-alarm structure fire, you could have a tactical operation, with SWAT operations and this and that. And, those are going to be environments that you're going to be put into that, are going to test, obviously, the operator's skills. And if he's not operated in this type of environment, it can pose, for one, a lot of liability risk, not only on the operator, but the agency as well, and stressing him, the command staff, and then, of course, potentially having a catastrophic failure of the equipment. With UTAC, the focus is around drone technology, but we also incorporate a variety of different other hardware, software, other technology solutions for a full ecosystem training environment where people can not only use drones, they can map a scenario and, produce a, rapid map on scene, or a, post-process. They can talk on radio comms and this and that. And so that really was the focus. And I'll flip back to, Alachua for a second here, because, as Tim had mentioned earlier, they had never been to anything like that. And I was just kind of curious on your perspective, the value behind that in being able to train in a scenario-based learning environment, and what your thoughts were.
First of all, in regards to UTAC, what struck me was the quality of the speakers and the subjects that they were presenting. And so that was a good launch to the exercises that we did later. Like I said, our team had never been in that sort of environment. The camaraderie and the ability to bounce ideas back and forth off all these talented people that were there, it was refreshing. The scenario-based learning, being able to normally, for an example, when we do search and rescue training, we stick somebody out in the woods, we try to find them, we try to get an accurate location and document that in some way. The particular search and rescue at UTAC was an actual C-130 crash site. There were flames involved, there were bodies everywhere. It was unprecedented level of realism that we had encountered as far as training goes.
Yeah, one of the other advantages of the UTAC is based on the fact that it is real world type training in the scenarios that you're placed in, it puts a level of stress on the pilot that you don't get in everyday training with your team. It causes them to have to think outside the box for some of the issues that you encounter during the scenarios, as well as giving you a basis to say, hey, this is what we need to improve upon. This is what we need to either add to our fleet or to our command side. And as a district chief, it also gave me the ability to say, from a command perspective, this is best use for the UAV should I encounter this type of situation, as well as understanding the limitations of the UAV. And for me to be able to think outside the box, saying, well, we can also use it like this to increase our crew safety, overall scene safety, and get a better image of what the entirety of the scene looks like. And as Rich said earlier, it becomes a force multiplier because you have better allocation of your resources that you currently have.
Yeah, thanks, Tim and Joe. And at the facility, I mean, we have 15 square blocks of cityscape, which is essentially about 65 acres. The facility where we host UTAC, it's over 800 acres. There's a over 2-mile stretch of DoD spec highway. So for those accident reconstruction scenarios, things like that. We were utilizing software such as Pix4D to be able to actually map crashes and then produce those orthomosaics afterwards. And so, things like that, having the ability to have live fire exercises, real world explosions, gunfires being, obviously, we're not firing live ammunition, but blanks and simunition rounds and things of that nature, as well as bringing in equipment, Bearcats, armored vehicles with, real world tactical teams, that are actually from agencies and, sharing some of their different tactics. Also the crash site, an actual C-130 that is completely dismantled as in a crash. And, we're able to light off fires and things like that. So what it would actually look like, as best that we can simulate what a crash that just happened and first responders are arriving to that and how they would encounter that scenario. You also see the image there, collapsed structures, being able to fly within that collapsed structure, a UAS platform, and looking for personnel or objects and things like that. So, it's definitely impactful. And I think, Joe mentioned it and I think that's a real key thing is how do you incorporate stress into a training environment? And, I, over the years, obviously 2 decades in public safety in the military, myself, I've been through a lot of different trainings and, not to say, they can't be stressful, but I think it's a different type of stress than actually performing on an operation. And so that's what we're trying to do here is being able to add something as real world as we can. I'm going to flip it over to Rich. He had a quick comment.
Yeah, I just want to mention one more thing too. One of the things that is hard to do, especially in public safety agencies, is work across the table with our local, whether it's fire, law enforcement agencies. And one of the great things about UTAC is it brings all of these different agencies together: emergency management, fire, police, DOD, government, 3-letter agencies, all this together. And we all get to learn from their experiences and whatnot. So as an active shooter scenario, I'm in fire service. There's 9 times out of 10, I probably won't run a scenario with those. But now with the agency that I could potentially run with on an active shooter scenario, I'm better trained for that in the fire side under the UAS. So having that mutual aid or that interagency interoperability is huge nowadays. And I think UTAC is great for that because it puts us all in the room together and lets us learn from each other.
Yeah, and we bring in industry leaders, vetted experts, keynote speakers from all over the country, and even outside the U.S. as well. And I think why that's important is just because you have, let's say, a law enforcement agency or a fire rescue agency. Operations are not always standardized. There are some standardized things that are being done on scenes and on real world calls, but many of the agencies, of course, are doing things a bit different. I think being able to share that is powerful, and that's why we have big networking event, the bonfire social, lunch events, and things like that. And so that definitely is of value, I think, to the attendees. Yeah, I've talked through most of these, but the key really here is scenario-based learning. We have for law enforcement, we do an active shooter scenario, hostage situation, vehicle takedowns, wanted subject. For fire rescue, water rescue operations, being able to not only incorporate aerial drones, but also unmanned surface vessels. So maritime applications and things like that. Hazmat and CBRNE, being able to actually deploy different hazmat sensors on the UAS platforms and things of that nature, I think are very valuable. And we can even the facility is registered where we can even bring in low dose radiation. So like, for example, we have a radiation sensor on the drone. We can actually fly that over to the object that is having the radiation source, and then meter that and see actually what that looks like and how to read that on the meter. Underground subway for a terrorist attack and how to deploy drone technology within that. There was a question that just came up as far as a vehicle takedown. Utilizing a drone, the days, and what we're finding is with tactical operations, the days of, just running into a big unknown is becoming less and less frequent. We're life safety is obviously number one. And, if there's a hostage, of course, their safety, but taking a little bit of a deep breath for a minute and evaluating what the scenario looks like that we're about to go into on a real world operation is of utmost importance to, for one, to save lives and things like that. So when we look at a vehicle takedown, for example, and we have, maybe a high risk individual, maybe it's a wanted subject for a murder or whatnot. How do we effectively take that person down using technology? And I think a drone, as well as some of the other equipment that we incorporate into these scenarios, can provide really a great means to be able to do that. So it is just one scenario that we do add in there. So this is just a general overview. You can see, some of the different photos. As I mentioned earlier, really the whole focus is end-to-end technology, real-world scenario-based immersion for public safety, defense, government, and industry. And we're looking forward to in the coming months hosting UTAC again, and we have attendees coming from around the world. And so I definitely think it will be valuable for those that are in attendance and being able to learn from so many different experts from around the globe.
Ryan, I appreciate it. UTAC's definitely something special to us. We'd love to have you guys out there at some point in time. Before we get to the questions here, I did just want to have Rich go over. I know we talked a lot about why we train like we do, and I think it's important for agencies to be able to train internally, but FlyMotion does offer quite a bit of different training opportunities, especially for agencies who are getting off the ground and those who want to get more advanced in what they're already doing. So I'll let Rich touch on just a few of those and kind of how that structure works for us, and then we'll go into some questions here.
One of the most difficult things for agencies is to where to start, and we work hand in hand with these folks as they want to figure out what kind of aircraft they need and what kind of training they need, policy, regulation, all that stuff. So one of the things we've learned a long time ago is it's sometimes easier just to kind of help walk the agency through the process from the ground up, whether it's like we said, the Part 107 side of it, the getting your airspace taken care of through COAs or whatever that may be. And then we come in and we help build out your training program. We help build out your policy. And then get you on the ground running. That's been a pretty tried and true practice of how we've operated. Kind of like what Tim and Joe said, we put the onus of the Part 107 on the pilots initially because we want them to have that buy-in, and then we come in and just kind of hit the ground running with them. But that's in the beginning we spend a lot of time diving into the processes of what the UAS is and what its capabilities are. And then we go, right into the NIST portion and hands-on basic flight and scenario-based learning.
Appreciate it, Rich. Some of the questions we have here, one of the first ones I'll direct over to Joe and Tim. Someone write in asking about ICS, assuming how that plays into training and possible deployment as well.
In the fire service, we make sure that all personnel on the team are qualified in ICS 100, 200, 7, and 8. We prefer they also take it upon themselves to go get 3 and 400 as well, so they're very familiar with the incident command system. It helps not only within the fire service, but with other agencies as well, so that we can develop a unified command and kind of work seamlessly together, establishing the different branches within ICS. The UAS would fall into the air ops portion of it as well. And just to go back a little bit, working with your local agencies is really important for your team. I know that we set up a training to work with our local law enforcement agency's Air Ops Division. so that they could get more comfortable working in the same space with UAS. So they're not, as opposed to us now coming on scene and still continuing to fly their helo while we're operating UAS at the same time. And all that plays into the incident command system itself.
Awesome. Appreciate it, guys. Another question here. I'll probably direct to Rich. Just asking for a little more detail on NIST standard and how it's incorporated into our training.
Yeah, the NIST is in itself, I could do a whole presentation on NIST, but in a nutshell, there's about 5 different standard tests, and then they have some that you can expand upon from those. Everything from the basic maneuvering to payload delivery to the different functions of different camera systems and stuff. And each one of those has a certifiable scored test that's timed for each mission that you'd run for that test, and you get a score for it. Now the scores aren't necessarily a pass fail. What it is, it's a score that shows the proficiency of the pilot and the aircraft he's flying, and it compares it to previous flights and times he's tested. And what you're able to do is to see how he's growing as a pilot and becoming more experienced. And those are that's the kind of pass fail you see. Now you can incorporate a pass fail in there if you decide to put time limitations on your pilots, and that happens quite a bit as well. Basically what would happen is we come out as part of the training and we teach the administrators, whoever your program managers are or your training officers at the agency, we basically teach them to how to administer the test for their pilots. We show them how to set the course up, get them set up so where they can do that. And typically what we're seeing agencies are doing is we try to recommend daytime and nighttime certification process through NIST, whether it's quarterly or biannually. It's kind of up to the agency, but ways we can help them set it up too for night operations and, get that certification as well.
Let's see. Question for the Alachua guys. How easy was it to get funding to go to a training conference like UTAC, and how did you go about counting that as training for your pilots?
It's something that we incorporate in our training budget. Now, our training budget for our department is spread across the whole department. So we get in early, we put in our requests, and we make our case for going to that level of training.
Yeah, Tim brings up a good point about budget. If you can get your organization to develop a budget for your program, that's great. If not, I can say from my personal experience of going to UTAC last year, our training budget was maxed out. We couldn't afford to send the number of people, so I just paid for it myself. It's just beneficial. I can't stress enough what you can learn, the networking that it creates, and how valuable it is to each individual pilot within the organization for the entire team.
And I think this is Ryan, just real quick on that. I think, we budgets are always something that we continue to see with, many of the agencies and organizations that we work with as challenges. And what has been a bit shocking to me, I think, is a lot of times particularly when individuals are setting up a UAS program and kind of getting things started with their agency, for example, I feel like a lot of times they're so enamored with the technology and the equipment that is what is budgeted for, is like, okay, yep, we got to get this drone and we got to have this sensor, and that's great, but I feel like training is always an afterthought. And the equipment is getting it is very user intuitive, but you're putting potentially tens and tens of thousands of dollars in the air, and it's not just about the monetary costs, it's about the liability as well. Personally, what I think should be happening is agencies and organizations should first be budgeting for training and then the capital equipment. But a lot of times I would say the majority of the time it's done the other way around. And I think we're trying to educate people of why the importance of training, and the many agencies that we have trained all over. There hasn't been one of them that hasn't come back to us and said, you know what, our guys are more proficient now, and we're having less damages or, things happening with the equipment. All of them are seeing more success after training. So I definitely think that, that needs to be, particularly if those of you that are on this webinar, if you're looking to start up a drone program, that needs to be incorporated into the cost. And training is not a guy that, at the agency that has been, maybe playing with drones for a bit. And then, he's the resident subject matter expert, which we've seen a lot. And, they bring some basic fundamental knowledge, but a lot of times too, there is a little bit of a relief from liability if those of you that are actually the operators can have a certificate of completion from a third-party training organization, for example, like FlyMotion, to present to your command staff, say, you know what, we've been trained up to this level. We've received these courses. There is a lot of value in that.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. 2 more questions real quick before we go. I've only got a couple minutes here. First one's for Ryan. What other locations does FlyMotion offer training at? I know we've talked about Guardian Centers. Are there other locations around the U.S. at our headquarters?
So, of course, obviously, UTAC is held at Guardian Centers. But as far as our training courses, we do have our training staff that can travel to your agency, and we do that routinely. And we are currently traveling as well. I know, obviously, there get a lot of questions with COVID, but we are taking the necessary precautions, and we do have our training staff that is still conducting trainings over this COVID mess as well. And we also are in the process, about 60 days or so, we will be in our new headquarters, which is a much, much larger facility with a lot more capabilities there. And, we'll definitely be providing some more information on that. But that's another option is, you're always more than welcome to come, and we do conduct trainings for a variety of applications, not just drone technology, but other technologies as well at our headquarters in Tampa. So I know Florida is always a great destination for people to come to, and we're about 45 minutes or so from Disney.
One last question. We're going to have to head out here for the sake of everybody's time. One thing I did want to say before I ask is if anybody's looking for some SOGs, just reach out to us via email. We've had a couple questions about that. Sales at FlyMotion US is on the screen there. We'd be happy to share those with you guys and get what we can to you to help you out. One last question for Alachua. In reference to your in-house training with the agency, how do you break up the 8 hours? Is it done all in one day or broken up throughout the month? Is it all hands-on portion, or is some of it online or classroom training?
We encourage all our pilots to stay current on the various agencies out there. They're posting various videos to YouTube on systems and software. That's kind of a given. We expect them to stay current on the industry information that's out there. In regards to our training, it's done in 1 8-hour block. The first 1 to 2 hours is spent basically in the classroom, reviewing systems, reviewing policy. And then the remainder of the time is spent hands-on with the different aircraft. We're scenario-based training. However, we incorporate various injects into that where we will lay out all the systems. Is just one of the few things we do. We'll lay out all the systems, give them a particular scenario, and let them choose the type of equipment that that's going to be needed on that particular scenario. And that could have GIS components to it. It could have live streaming components to it. It could have some troubleshooting components to it. And we try to mix it up. As far as NIST goes, we don't actually have a course yet. We're working on that, but we use NIST components. So for example, if we're doing bomb training, we make simulated devices and we will stage them around various locations that will require them to use a lot of the practices in NIST to identify that object and bring back information to the incident commander on the next step that's going to be involved. Variety is good. We go to various locations throughout Alachua County. We generally start at our headquarters, and in some cases, we'll just hand them a mission and say, okay, here's your equipment. You need to break up in teams, and this needs to happen. Variety is good.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. There was one last question I'll address real quick. Someone was asking if they can use our summer series videos for holding, trainings internally for themselves. Of course, all of our summer videos are on our YouTube. Use them at your leisure. That's what they're there for, is for information to be disseminated to you guys. So please use them if you can use them. We thank you all for joining us so much. Of course, a huge thank you to Joe and Tim over at Alachua for taking the time to be with us today. And we hope that we see you guys soon. And of course, Ryan and Rich, thank you guys so much for making the time today. We'll leave it with that. Thank you guys for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.